The auction yard smelled of rust, sweat, and silent desperation. Among dozens of animals destined for slaughter, one stood out, not because he was magnificent, but because he wasn't. Covered in dirt and scars, with a limp in his left hind leg and fear in his eyes, the old bay gelding was more ghost than horse. His name was never spoken. No one knew it. To the workers, he was just Lot 27. Damaged, useless, broken. He'd once raced across open fields, mane flying like fire in the wind. But those days had long passed, stolen by an abusive owner who saw only profit in muscle and speed. When he collapsed during training, they didn't send for a vet. They sent a truck. After bouncing between hands, none kinder than the last, he'd finally landed here, a final stop before the meat factory. The gavel slammed. Sold for $75. He was loaded into a trailer with no name and no promise of tomorrow. But fate has a way of bending even the straightest of roads. That same week, in a mansion 30 miles away, a man with a fortune that could buy 10,000 horses was preparing to euthanize this one. He had bought him not out of need, but by mistake, a clerical error by one of his stable managers. And now the unwanted animal stood at death's door again. The vet was scheduled for Thursday, and yet, as the horse stood silently in his new stall, head hung low, a pair of gentle eyes watched him from behind the wooden slats. A girl, no older than 16, the millionaire's daughter. And in that quiet moment, the story that would change all their lives began. The days that followed were strange for the horse. He was no longer surrounded by the cries of doomed animals or the metallic stench of blood. Now he was in a place so clean, so quiet, it felt like a dream he didn't deserve. The stalls were warm, the hay was golden, and there was fresh water. Not the dirty puddles he was used to. But despite the comfort, he remained still, almost lifeless, staring at the walls like a prisoner waiting for his sentence. He didn't trust this place. He didn't trust the people. And above all, he didn't trust kindness. The millionaire's daughter, Lily, watched him from a distance every day. There was something in the way he stood, proud but broken, that drew her to him. Other horses in the stable would neigh or nuzzle when approached, but not him. He didn't move. He didn't respond. He didn't even blink when she brought him an apple, placing it gently on the edge of his stall. But Lily didn't give up. Day by day, she returned. She didn't try to pet him. She didn't force him to interact. She simply sat, sometimes reading aloud, sometimes drawing in her sketch pad, other times just watching him as he stood in silence. And slowly, something began to shift. One morning, as she read a story beneath the soft morning light, the horse took a step forward. It was small, hesitant, but it was a step. For the first time, his ears turned toward her voice. For the first time, his eyes held a flicker of something beyond pain, something like curiosity. In that tiny moment, barely noticeable to anyone else, hope stirred inside the soul of a creature long forgotten by the world. And Lily saw it. She smiled and kept reading. The days passed, and the bond between Lily and the horse grew stronger. What began as silence turned into gentle whinnies and hesitant steps. The horse, now named Shadow, responded to Lily's voice, followed her movements, and even allowed her to gently touch his mane. It was a miracle unfolding before the eyes of the stable staff, and more importantly, before her father. For the first time, Mr. Whitmore saw a horse, not as an investment, but as a creature with emotion, trauma, and the ability to heal. Then came a fateful afternoon that would change everything. Lily was out riding Shadow in a secluded part of the estate's vast countryside. The golden sun was beginning to dip low in the sky, casting long shadows through the trees. Laughter echoed through the woods as the girl and her horse moved in perfect sync, their trust in one another unmistakable. But in the distance, danger was silently brewing. A low growl broke the harmony of the moment. Before Lily could understand what was happening, a wild dog, snarling and feral, burst from the brush. It was thin, vicious, likely rabid, and charging straight at her horse's legs. Shadow reared back, his instincts flaring, but instead of bolting, he stood his ground. Lily screamed as the dog lunged, but Shadow moved faster. With a powerful snap of his hooves, Shadow knocked the dog away, shielding Lily from the attack. He circled around her, positioning himself between her and the danger. The dog returned, lunging again. But this time Shadow reared up and came down hard, hooves smashing into the dirt, forcing the creature to retreat into the woods, whining. Lily trembled, frozen in shock. And Shadow stood firm. He didn't run. He didn't falter. He protected her. That day, Shadow didn't just earn Lily's love. He earned Mr. Whitmore's respect, and he earned his life back. The moment news of the attack reached Richard, he dropped everything. His helicopter landed at the estate's clearing within minutes. Security and medics rushed to Lily, but all she could talk about was how Shadow saved her. She clutched the horse's mane tightly, refusing to let go. Her sobs pierced Richard's heart like nothing ever had. When Richard saw them, his daughter trembling, clinging to the very horse he had condemned, something shifted in him. He approached slowly, his face hardened by years of cold business, now softening with every step. "Daddy," Lily whispered, eyes brimming with tears. "He saved me. Shadow saved my life." The stallion stood between them like a silent protector. Richard looked into the animal's dark eyes, and for the first time he saw not a beast, but a soul. Shadow stood still, noble and unafraid, as if aware of what he had done. Richard knelt beside his daughter, pulling her into his arms. He glanced at the horse and whispered, more to himself than anyone, "I was wrong about you." The estate staff stood in stunned silence. Everyone expected fury, a command to get rid of the horse. But instead, Richard walked up to Shadow slowly and ran a hand over the horse's powerful neck. "From today, this is your home. Forever," Lily gasped. Shadow exhaled slowly. The tension melted like ice in spring. That moment marked the end of the old Richard, the cold tycoon who measured everything in profit and loss. From then on, he was something more, a father who learned that love, loyalty, and courage sometimes come from the most unexpected places, even from a horse once sentenced to die. The silence was thick as the sun began to dip behind the hills, casting long shadows across the open field. The girl, clutching the horse's reins tightly, walked up to the stage where the auction had been held earlier that day. Her face was streaked with dust, but her eyes burned with a fierce clarity that no one had seen before, not even her father. The crowd, murmuring with confusion and awe, parted as she stepped forward. Behind her, the stallion walked without hesitation, as if he understood this moment belonged to them both. The millionaire, who had only moments ago demanded the horse's removal, now stood frozen, unable to speak. His daughter, once thought fragile and naive, had risked everything to save a creature condemned to die, a creature who, in turn, had saved her life. Tears welled up in the man's eyes as the reality settled in. His empire could build monuments, buy anything, silence anyone. But it could not fabricate the bond that had just unfolded before him. It was raw, it was real, and it was beyond price. He took a step forward, his voice trembling. "This horse is no longer condemned." He paused, looking at his daughter and then the stallion. "He's a hero." The crowd erupted into applause, many wiping tears from their eyes. The girl smiled through her tears and threw her arms around the stallion's neck. And in that moment, man, beast, and child stood as equals, united by a second chance, by courage, and by love. Weeks passed, and the estate that once echoed with the cold rhythm of business began to hum with new life. The once condemned stallion, now named Valor, had become more than just a survivor. He was a symbol. Newspapers ran stories with headlines like, "The Horse Who Changed a Millionaire's Heart." People came from miles around to visit, not to see wealth, but to witness the bond that had stunned the world. The young girl, whose voice had once been drowned out in the noise of boardrooms and business calls, was now listened to with respect. She spent her mornings with Valor, brushing his coat, feeding him apples, and reading to him under the shade of an old oak. Her laugh, once rare and fleeting, now echoed freely across the fields. Her father changed too. For the first time, he wasn't just present, he was there. He began joining her in the stables, asking questions about horses, even learning how to ride. The walls he had built around himself, brick by brick, through years of business, began to crumble with every soft nuzzle from the horse who had saved his daughter's life. He set up a rescue foundation in Valor's name, dedicating it to saving animals from neglect and slaughter. Every life deserves a second chance, the Foundation's motto read, words inspired by his daughter's courage and a horse's loyalty. In the place where there was once judgment and cold calculation, there now stood love, healing, and redemption. And at the heart of it all, one black stallion who had been condemned to die, but lived to change lives. Seasons passed, but the bond between Emily and Shadow only grew stronger. Each morning she would race out to the paddock with a smile that could melt the hardest heart, and Shadow would greet her with a soft whinny, nuzzling her shoulder like a lifelong friend. He had saved her once, but in truth he saved her every single day, with his loyalty, his strength, and his silent understanding. Her father, once a man too busy for anything but profit, had changed in ways even he couldn't explain. Where once he saw the horse as a burden, now he saw a guardian, a teacher, a gift. The stables became his retreat, the place where he watched his daughter grow, where he too began to heal. Years later, on Emily's 18th birthday, she whispered something into Shadow's ear. "You saved me. You changed my life, and I promise I'll protect you for the rest of yours." The old stallion blinked slowly, leaning his head into her chest as if he understood every word. By then, Shadow had become a legend in their town, a symbol of second chances, of loyalty rewarded, and of the miracle that happens when a man opens his heart. No longer condemned, no longer forgotten. He was family, and in the hearts of all who knew him, he would never be just a horse. He was a hero. Years rolled on, and time, as it always does, left its gentle marks. Shadow's gallop slowed, his once glossy coat now dusted with silver. But to Emily, he was still the same proud hero, the same brave soul who once stood between her and death. One chilly autumn morning, Emily found Shadow standing quietly beneath the old oak tree, where they had shared countless memories. He turned his head as she approached, eyes soft, deep, knowing. She wrapped her arms around his strong neck, burying her face in his mane. "I love you," she whispered. "You can rest now." That evening, Shadow lay down peacefully under a golden sky and took his final breath, surrounded by love, not fear, honored, not forgotten. The next day, they buried him beneath the oak, where the leaves would forever fall gently on the soil that cradled a legend. A stone was placed there, engraved with the words, "He was condemned, but became a savior, a life spared, a life that saved." Visitors came. Locals spoke of the story like a sacred tale. Children listened with wide eyes. And Emily, she built a sanctuary in his name, where unwanted horses, just like Shadow once was, would find safety, care, and a second chance. Shadow may have left this world, but the echo of his hooves, the strength of his heart, and the love he sparked in a broken family would never fade. Because some heroes wear no armor. Some just walk on four legs and change the world quietly.